I'm gonna start. All right, we should be running live, and it takes a second to hit all the channels. But today, welcome everybody to another live show. This Week in Drones, Thursdays at 1 p.m. We are here with some special guests that have recently come from the federal world, the federal agencies they can describe here in a minute, but they're going to bring some insights to what we've been reading in Part 108 and some of what the FAA is trying to do related to the TSA and security programs and threat assessments on that side of the fence as well. And so really excited to have them join us today. We'll kind of springboard. We'll do some I'll show our faces here again, but we'll do some introductions and kind of chat about our backgrounds, get to know each other a little bit, and then we'll dive into some of the topics here. But otherwise, I'm your host, David Lewin, here This Week in Drones. Also, my day job is with Equidyne Radars, providing that airspace awareness. But with that, Michelle, if you don't mind just doing an introduction as well, and then I'll pass it to Ray because we got to run into each other at a recent event, had some great conversations. And then Ray, I'll kind of let you springboard it to Misty. A little bit of introduction, a little bit of background, and then we'll dive into the topic of the day. But yeah, with that, Michelle, feel free to introduce yourself.
All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Thanks for joining us again this week. My name is Michelle Duquette. I run a small consulting firm called 3 Mad Air. And so Ray and I have met one time at that same event. Misty, we have not met yet. This is our first time. So for context, I am 35 years in aviation, started out as an aircraft dispatcher, very operationally oriented. Then after 10 years of that, went to the MITRE Corporation, the FAA's federally funded research and development center, and did all kinds of things there. Basically had an invaluable education on the workings of the NAS, and both on the operational side, but also on the infrastructure side. I became a translator between the engineers and the ops folks. Retired in November and started this little consulting firm. And I have vowed to David that I will be here as often as I can to provide color commentary for his podcast.
Wonderful, wonderful. Always glad to have you, Michelle, and your brilliance on the show. With that, Ray, if you don't mind providing a little bit of background, some introductions. Sounds like you're just getting off your cooling off period. So looks like you're not wearing a jacket, so it wasn't too cold, but take us into your world for a second there.
Well, first off, thank you for having me, David. It's great to be joining today, to be sharing some of my experience. Michelle, it's great to be catching up. I know at our last conference, we had some great conversations. So glad to continue today. For everyone, thanks for having me. I'm Ray Wilkerson of Precision Air Drones. I have 15 years of regulation and policy and compliance experience, most recently supporting TSA under the enrollment services and vetting programs. My primary focus now and for the future is creating scalable drone programs with an emphasis on identifying how to get you from the beginning to the end. I have been primarily supporting the government to identify those different logistical challenges related to regulation and policy. And then in turn, identify solutions that we can, leverage in the industry to ensure compliance across the board, particularly related to vetting initiatives. And in my time working at TSA, I had the honor to have met and worked closely with the Honorable Misty Fox, and I'll roll out the red carpet for her.
Thanks, Ray. Misty Fox here. I am the principal consultant for 135 Compliance Solutions. Just recently retired with over 20 years with the TSA, interpreting regulations and approving security programs. I completely understand operational pain points and also the need to protect the national airspace. My role now as a consultant is I focus on creating security programs, modifying security programs, starting up operations for operators, as well as helping out with security coordinator. Thanks you guys so much for having me today. I'm excited to get this going.
Beautiful. Well, for everyone out there, first of all, wonderful to meet you guys. And for everyone listening in live, feel free to send in your comments, your questions as we work through this. We've got perspectives from TSA and, FAA coming from Michelle's background on the hook today. And Michelle, what you're like 35 years in it, and Misty like 20 plus years, right? Ray, how many years old are you again?
15.
15. I'm like 3 years old in the aviation industry. My wife and I were always like, we've been married, like about 14 years, and we're like teenager. We have a teenager marriage, But anyways, with that, feel free to type in your questions and thoughts, guys. We love to make this a back and forth interaction. But all right, with that, I'm gonna quickly, I'll pull up some things on the screen really quick. First of all, shout out to our flight crew members. Andrew, my guy, he always blasts out invites and is just like my main man for helping sustain the podcast as well. Thank you, sir. Go check him out. Digital Twins TAC, all things drones. He's in California working with a bunch of cool stuff out there, man. And about to get married. Congratulations, brother. And then to kind of springboard this topic, there was an article I just saw reposted today, Drone XL, about TSA security rules and how they might ground Walmart's drone delivery before it takes off. And it's really emphasizing what came out in the draft NPRM. Mentioned, how many comments just got posted and some of the color within that. And so I think, this is kind of a topic of debate as people have been kind of submitting questions up to that deadline that was a few days ago, relating to how the NPRM kind of mixed two different worlds, right? It mixed that scalable operation FAA side of things with a security element that didn't quite feel like they supported each other, or that they maybe were put together at the same time, or there was kind of just different thoughts. And even in that article, they referenced how like some people commented and said, should those just be broken apart as two separate things? Should there be the FAA regulations around scale as one thing, and then maybe pull out the TSA and security elements and maybe republish those with more public feedback, as kind of its own separate lane? So just with that, any one of you, if you want to kind of give a stab at what's going on here and start pulling this apart, that'd be great.
I'll jump in there initially as we look at this, right? It's in an environment where it seems like it's very new, almost as if TSA is this is the first time we're really seeing it very, very dominant in this field. But I'm sure Michelle will agree that since September 11th and FAA and TSA splitting apart, being TSA established itself, TSA has always been a part of the aviation solution, right? How do we look at how TSA is going to play a part? And in a lot of instances in the past, personally, I've seen that TSA doesn't let itself be known so dominant. Now, there are things like privacy impact assessments that all FAA certificate operators have reviewed in order to have those certificates, and of which in there is a level of security threat assessment, right? So every single FAA certificate that has ever been since 2001 has gone through the similar process as the future drone operators will continue to do. And me as a Part 107 certificate operator, I also sign the line that says that the organization will identify any nexus related to terrorism. And the way that could be done would be working with other federal agencies. So yes, in the past, we haven't really stated, or TSA hasn't really come out and said, I'm the one that's doing all of this and I'm the one up front. But they leave a lot of that business working relationship that they have with FAA, because they're so synced, to kind of the normal status quo. It's, yes, you're going through the process. They work with other federal agencies completely, in agreement with that. And they conduct those operations as needed through those opportunities with other agencies. So I'm not so agreeing with the industry that it's new. It's just more so that it's now at the forefront, right? And I oftentimes look at this as like a way that, these agencies are finally being proactive in this regard, instead of it being, well, later down the road, if something happened, now we have to now be a part of it, right? I think it's a lot harder to add to existing policy and regulation than to have it existing and then identify how to work between, those opportunities as it's already been stated. So it's for my own opinion, I'm happy that TSA is finally a part of the conversation, of this larger bubble. but I would definitely say that it's not so new in the world of aviation, though it's just new up front. It's just that was the situation. It wasn't as dominant.
Interesting. Now you're referring to like how Part 107 pilots, as they get that certificate, have to go through some sort of TSA check, background check, or whatever that's called. Now with Part 108, it's a little bit different with who's involved, right? Like the way it was at least written, drafted, it's a little bit unique to that. It's not like the individuals are all each certified as pilots, which is also debatable. If there should be people running the ship within Part 108 with these mass drone fleets that are all automated, if those people should not have to have any sort of certification in aviation, that's a little concerning in itself. So I think a lot of the comments probably pushed on that and probably said, hey, maybe these guys should have some level of certification if they're going to be overseeing operations of all these drones in the national airspace. So that's a whole thread in itself. But the fact that it's currently a little more generic than that, like, who exactly is getting certified individually is left wide open, or kind of non-existent. Does that now make all these TSA background checks required for everyone involved in the entire chain of these big mass drone delivery networks? In other words, the person that works at Walmart that's like stocking the shelves, that happens to like go pick the item off the shelf and go put it in the box that the drone's going to deliver. Does that now flow down to them that they have to have like TSA background checks for terrorism ties as just someone who signed up to work at Walmart, part-time or whatever, and maybe only like loads the drone, once a month as part of one of their shifts or something like that? And I think that's kind of the pushback there. Am I off there, or what are we thinking?
Go ahead, Ray. I'm just going to chime in for a second. Ray and I have had so many conversations about this exact same thing. But since Ray is the expert security threat assessment individual, I'm going to defer to you, Ray, on this one.
Yeah, I think it goes hand in hand with you, Misty. So I'll piggyback back over to you, which is, you have that component of who needs to have that security threat assessment. As we saw the rule, it does have up to a level 3 STA included. Now, as we try to figure out that granularity, that gray space, that's where I believe that established security program really comes into place. And that's where I pass it back over to Misty on why security programs in reference to how we conduct vetting are so important.
Yeah, so your security program, that's what you're going to be audited against. So your security program will outline who's getting, which STA. So it's kind of like your Bible, your how to make the regulation work for your operation. So there is a little play in that. And then, also you have to be realistic, right? Like the person stocking the shelf, do they need what kind of STA do they need? And then even going back from that, what about the person that packaged the chip bag, like Ray and I were just saying? Like, there has to be some dare I say common sense, but I'm sure it will get it will get worked out. But again, your security program is where you're going to really outline these details.
Right, those provisions. And I'll just add to that, being that as you are looking at those details and they are being gray, in my experience, I've seen those security programs are the area or environment where these operational definitions are identified, right? Like if we're looking at, the covered individual, the operation manager or operation supervisor, what does that look like? And are you going to include that in your security framework or your security program that is inevitably audited against later for verifying that you're compliant, right?
Nope. Sorry, you chopped there at the very end, Ray, but I think we got it. And so the way I'm hearing this, and Michelle, I could see your gears turn. I definitely want to hear some of your thoughts. But what I'm picking up from this is like in the electric utility world, they have compliance for security under, even physical security under something called NERC SIP, right? And even in that, there's kind of parameters that they have to follow, but it's not totally prescriptive. And what they have to do is create their own security plan where they've done a risk assessment, each individual large, utility, and they break down their various facilities into tiers, and which ones are the most critical. And then of those most critical, then they have to do a risk assessment of like, what is our risk? Is it gunshots over the fence, through the fence to hit a radiator? Is it drones now? Now do we have to look up at the airspace? But they're like needing to actually create an assessment and then say, here's our risk profile against that thing. Therefore, here's what we're going to mitigate against, or put in drone detection now if drones are now an issue. If they didn't say that, if they did a risk assessment to determine we have no risk to drones as far as we know, based on historical data, yada, yada, we don't need to do anything about drones because it's not in our, we decided ourselves based on our program that we don't need to, measure against that. And so then they literally get audited by agencies that can find them. If they don't put in measures, if they leave vulnerabilities open that they knew about, essentially, in their own plan. Is that what you guys are saying that you think the industry is supposed to do with this, with Part 108, like create their own aviation program for their drone delivery networks under, say, a Walmart or whoever, and then within that program, they have to do their own assessments? And I'm kind of repeating what you said, but is that a parallel? Is that kind of close to what you're expecting the industry to do with this as it's currently written?
As long as it touches on all the areas in the regulation. So like, for example, cybersecurity, physical security, as long as it touches on, those exact areas, they can add to it. They can add whatever they want to their security program, but it can't be less than what's in the regulation. Maybe something doesn't apply to them that's in the regulation, and then that just has to be identified in the security program. But yeah, I mean, it's essentially what works for your operation, as long as you're not leaving anything out that's in the regulation. Does that make sense?
I think so. I mean, Michelle, take it away.
So I'm really appreciative that we're having this conversation. As an aviation person, I understood the intent of the language in 108. What it screamed to me was, okay, this was a rush job, the 11th hour, and we could have done better at being clear. So clarifying language is probably in order to address that section. What I found interesting and did my heart good was that TSA called out the what are those positions called? The flight coordinator and the ops supervisor specifically as covered persons, even though 108 was saying they did not have to be certificated positions, which I find to be a little scary given that they touch operational control. So I liked that was called out, that was recognized. Covered persons. So I think the intent was right. Let's make sure that anybody that could do something bad within this aviation portion of a much bigger business, whether it's Walmart or whomever, that they be fully vetted. And as Misty says, that there's a security program that's put in place, because that's how we've always done it. And it's not only that's how we've always done it, it's the right thing to do. Each company has to be accountable for the security and protection of their product. So it all, intrinsically, it all made sense to me. However, we're not in that same world anymore. We're in a brand new ball game where there are people who, like that article, will choose to take the language in its literal sense and take it to that nth degree, which then ends up taking it out of context. So now we're out of aviation context, and we're into this is actually how the flow will work. It's unlikely that a shelf stalker, okay, that didn't come out right. The person who stalks the shelves, he's not creeping on anybody.
I think stalkers are going to get nixed from if you do an assessment. I'm
going to get a lot of love from that one. But I don't think that it was, I find it hard to believe that it was the intention of TSA to say that anyone that is stocking shelves is going to be required to have it up to a level 3 security threat assessment. What I am assuming what they intended was anybody that's involved in that aviation aspect. So that makes a lot of sense to me because that is how we do it in the legacy aviation world. Anybody that's loading an aircraft, anybody that's bringing cargo onto the ramp to load onto the aircraft, bringing it onto the airport property, we know, and then the people, there's their own security clearances and security checks and backgrounds. We get all that and we accept it because it's the right thing to do. We've got another level of aviation that we've just opened up this can of worms, and we're still figuring out what the details need to be. While I understood the intent, I was disappointed that this is the language that was allowed to go out in the NPRM. And I was disappointed, not necessarily in the FAA, but I was disappointed in TSA for putting that forward because this isn't new to them either. And there could have been more effort put into getting to plain language and making sure that those non-aviation folks that did have to read this really understood kind of the importance of these roles and maybe the significance of the kinds of security checks that we expect in aviation. And it doesn't matter if you're Walmart or Amazon or whoever you are. We are going to require you to have a security program that's appropriate to touch the aviation world. So I'm hoping that this was probably a placeholder just to get the NPRM out. And I appreciate that because Lord knows we didn't want to wait any longer. However, now that the comments are done and the adjudication process has begun, I'm hoping that this gets addressed appropriately. And as Misty said, with the common sense that we know is there, but just for whatever reason, didn't quite make it to the finish line in time for the NPRM. I am a little concerned about the government shutdown and how that might affect us. And I guess I'll ask you guys, do you have any insight into how they might prioritize this rulemaking, knowing, with the government shutdown environment right now?
Speaking from my experience, I've not been a part of rulemaking during a government shutdown to speak directly to that. See if Misty has any direct experience.
No, I was going to defer to you on that, Ray.
Yeah, I mean, operating during a time of a shutdown, I have seen that, sometimes our timelines or priorities have had to be on a pause because there's no physical resources that are able to push those dates. So if I had like a 3-month date out for an event or an initiative, when I did take that little pause, I then a month later resumed and pushed all of my scheduling a couple months down. So in my opinion, it could be something where they just pick right up, but we're not going to see the exact dates. But we have seen the political environment favoring drone programs. So it could be that it raises in priority, but we just don't know now until, that level of uncertainty starts coming down and the government resumes.
Misty,
go ahead. Yep, go ahead.
I'm curious how you would. I love that you're 135. What is it? 135 compliance. So that tells me a whole lot just of your title. So how would you recommend, or maybe you could just paint the picture of what a package delivery drone operation for, I mean, we don't have to pick on Walmart, for anybody, what that security program should look like. And what's that reach? How far should it go into the company? What should it connect to within the company? Can you paint us a picture there?
Yeah, so I also want to touch on something that you were talking about previously with the language in the NPRM. I think that we'll see, further down the road, we will see that TSA will come out with a drone security program. And it will give more context as to what's needed in these operator security programs. So it will, it will have more definition, it will be more detailed, it'll be more specific. But, just going off of what we know now, what's in the NPRM, essentially it's not, I think that the operators think that it's more of a heavy lift than it actually is. I mean, it's really quite simple. I mean, we have, STAs, we have cybersecurity measures, we have physical security measures, and we have to identify the flight coordinators, the operations supervisors. We need some sort of security contact. So it's really not that heavy of a lift. I mean, I think it might be intimidating to, like these companies that just aren't familiar with the process or what needs to happen. But it's the the security program that TSA will eventually come out with will essentially just walk you through the program. It will tell you everything that you need to know. So um, it's 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 really not that heavy a lift. I know it's very intimidating from people that just aren't from the security background or don't have the security background. But essentially, you're just going to, define your positions, outline how you're doing your STAs, talk about your cybersecurity, like the incident response, what you're doing to protect your data, your drone systems, your physical security, how you're protecting your facilities, your drones, your assets. I mean, I say that it's not a heavy lift because, I am in the world of security programs. But I think that once there's more clarity, it's hopefully companies and operators won't be so intimidated or threatened or, feel like, oh, we can't do this because of all these security measures.
That seems like a great opportunity as you're growing your company to put out content on that, educating people. I'm sure you probably are already, but even this, if this inspires you, this context, to do more, of this kind of content. People obviously, there's a gap there, a pretty big gap, it seems like, of understanding. If you could simplify it and make people more aware and more ready to embrace it, that I think that would go a long way for the industry for sure. We do have some
Yeah.
comments at all from
Sorry.
the. Oh no, please go ahead. Yeah.
No, I was just gonna agree with you. Like I understand that, we like Ray and I live in the world of security. So it's like second nature for us. But I understand that, people that don't live in that world, that live in, the Walmart world or DoorDash or whatever these other worlds, it's, I understand that it can be intimidating.
Yeah, and I just want to add to that by thanking Michelle for bringing that up. Is that is primarily that translation between regulation compliance and a new industry trying to adhere to those regulations to be compliant, right? It's a very confusing conversation, obtainable, but it's difficult when you're just getting into it. I mean, we just had to read 765 plus pages of an NPRM. Like, it's going to be something where you're going to be a little overwhelmed. But that's where Misty and I, we really sat together and we looked at some of the latest and greatest policy and regulation. We both live and breathe it, right? And then we saw that the security program, personnel vetting pieces of Part 108 were something where we can lean our experience into that environment, help organizations overcome it. If you're one of those folks like Target, Walmart, and those folks who may not have an existing aviation program, it's going to be translated completely different to you. But that's where we add that experience and we start translating. I've seen a lot of photos of what these drone delivery programs are going to consist of as they're in the pilot phase, as they're in the operational phase. And just from the first looks, on my own opinion, I wouldn't say they're too far off. But when you're looking at those photos, then taking it to the context of a security program, it's going to boggle your mind. You're going to go, how does 1 equal 1? And how does that work? Well, that's where Misty has the talent to map you to, that's how that regulation applies. And when you need services for those additional requirements like personnel vetting, that's where I come in. That's how we really work closely, is we're going to identify, how it's going to, what needs to be done, but then the how is where we develop solutions so that these organizations who may not be so dominant in aviation don't have to feel that burden of now trying to adopt new policy, new regulation into their operations. So that's why we really like that.
I imagine there are folks out there that are going, "Phew, glad you two exist. Thank you." But let's get into some of the pragmatism here. So we know today that if there is a package that needs to go on an aircraft, and we'll look at folks like Amazon and FedEx and UPS, I mean, they have their security program so well tuned that they have combined it with their package sorting and organization, and it gets scanned for a number of different reasons as it goes along the conveyor belts, those big massive sorting belts. But these are legacy aviation companies, right? They're big, and they've figured out, they've learned by doing, and they've been able to build those efficiencies into their overall business model. That's not really who we're talking about here. And I know that article called out Walmart, and Walmart has its own aircraft, and I get all that, but they aren't they don't have big scanners that they're going to put at every store to run the boxes through, the packages through. What this does, in my mind, is it opens up a whole different element of scanning technology opportunity. All of you tech nerds out there, we're probably going to need something in a handheld format that can suit the need of 5 pounds or less type packaging, that if it's not being packaged at the facility, if somebody has brought it in, there's got to be some level of security screening that happens, whatever that looks like. So I'm sure these security programs, actually you two, will figure that out. In the larger sense, where it's the company that is doing it themselves, and whether it's a restaurant that's giving DoorDash the package to put on the DoorDash drone, or whatever it is, there does need to be some level of assurance that what is being transported by that drone is the intended content. That may be a screener, it may be something else. We might have to put something else in place, because the cars don't have that. There's nobody standing at the car that picks it up from DoorDash that says, is that your burrito? I need proof that this is your burrito. So,
I mean, shouldn't common sense say that we should just follow until the handoff happens, that we should follow the same principles? Like, in other words, the restaurant makes it, they bag it, they place the bag at the DoorDash pickup on the shelf or whatever, right? These are like pickup orders, and then that's what the restaurant's responsible for. They've done their job. I don't see that we need to add additional vetting to that part of the process. But then once perhaps it's like picked up by the now drone delivery organization, maybe the person handling it from that handoff then has that additional vetting, perhaps. But I mean, how would you add, again, go back to Target, we'll call it, instead of picking on the same company, that they do pickup orders as well, right? Where they bag things and they set them up and they stage them, and they maybe even put them into a special shelf that or a locker or whatever that looks like. Then the person shows up and they pick up the items, and those are two separate steps. Should those stay separate? That way we don't have to work it all the way back, or what? What are your thoughts?
Well, just initially jumping off thinking about this, you had me thinking about the DoorDash scenario. And this is just talking about the levels of security that have incrementally been adopted, even in the food delivery environment, of which we don't have a scanner per se. We can't sell it's a Caesar salad, so on. But what you are seeing is that in the early days of DoorDash and early delivery, you were seeing your McDonald's, your other bags being delivered wide open and open to the air, and the driver driving it to you. But inevitably, customers started seeing that their orders were messed up, something was missing, and they would go back to the organization and go, I didn't get my French fries. But McDonald's would say, I put the French fries in there, thus determining that someone must have manipulated or touched the items that were in the bag between delivery, which then you don't want to state the responsibility on the driver, placing blame on them. You have to somewhat assess liability somewhere, though. So what we now see in almost all your DoorDash deliveries is that the restaurant's going to be putting a sticker on it to make sure it hasn't been opened, or they're going to staple it shut to make sure someone can't open it during transit. thus making sure that they're not liable from the moment it leaves their door to the time it arrives to your door, maintaining that DoorDash's driver is the one that it could be tampering with that item. So there are processes in place today in just different lights that people utilize to avoid potential areas of tamperment or any type of security related risks. If someone wanted to poison that food, they could. But one thing that you would know is that the seals have been broken. So just like going trick-or-treating on Halloween, don't eat candy that's already been opened. It's kind of like what you're seeing there. Now, as you're looking at this environment, kind of going off of Michelle's comment, talking a little bit about how that cargo, and this could also be passed over to Misty, is that if we look at cargo from a logistical challenge at the highest level of securing that cargo, putting it in a box that no one can tamper with on an isolated site, that can get very confusing. You got training that you have to abide by. You've got to make sure that everyone on the chain knows and is aware of the process. It's going to take a while. So in lieu of this being a new process, do you look at it from a very limited perspective and start layering in a few additional things? Keep in mind, when larger cargo is being handled, especially in warehouse to an airport, that same freight, unless it's done under an airport security program, that freight will then have to be searched again and validated that it is in fact able to be processed through that gate and onto that airplane. That cargo loader, that person has a security threat assessment to ensure they're not going to be tampering with that item too. And there's a load and balancing of requirement due to the aircraft, right? Because if I'm going to be bringing elephants, I can't be bringing elephants in the back of the aircraft, or else it's going to not be able to fly right. So we have to look at this as a multimodal environment where we have to scale down these cargo environments into a very small instance. Even in this particular environment, we have to be considering drones and their thrust capabilities and their overall capability of handling cargo and freight. We already have regulation in place limiting the weight and the size, but as you're looking at that, any logical aircraft operator or even drone operator like myself, if I was going to bring cargo onto my drone, I would be load and balancing it. Whether it be a sensor put on the front of my drone, all the way down to a Gatorade bottle that I might be having, and it's liquid, so it's going to be moving around during the flight. I want to ensure that my flight and its capability are possible by ensuring that the freight itself that I'm carrying is what I think it is, and it's properly, put in its place so that I can conduct my operation safely and effectively.
So let me interject this just for the audience as well as listening. So I could almost imagine this. Correct me if I'm wrong here. Imagine big box store, mass deliveries all the time. Maybe a new technology comes out that's a set of lockers that that they have to put the food or the delivery, the toothpaste or whatever, the store, the person who works there, the stalker who lives the person stocking people around the shelves.
Gonna get a lot of mileage out of that.
Exactly.
I can tell already.
So they'll grab the set of 6 Gatorades or whatever, drop them in a locker, and then that locker maybe has weight bearing, weight scale in it, maybe a scanner to look for bomb threats or weapons or something. Who knows? That could be a choke point as an example. Is that kind of what we're alluding to? And then it weighs it scans it, and it says green light on that. And then there's 10 green lights and 1 red or something. And then the store needs to go look at the red one and go, shoot, we can't deliver 6 of these. Let's do 4. And let's message the person back and tell them, hey, or whatever. Right. Is that kind of where we're going or not?
I'd say it depends. I really do say it depends. I mean, where I think this is headed is this is one of those areas in the periphery that we all know as aviation folks that it's a non-starter. You must have, period. But what we've not had a chance to do yet is to do that translation. So it's not necessarily that the legacy aviation policy and practice one-to-one directly conveys to this environment. In fact, in some cases, it's just nonsensical. So we have to do that translation still and understand kind of where those vulnerability points are in this new chain of events, and then develop the security wrapper around it. Now, in some cases, like the example you were saying, Ray, where McDonald's put a sticker on the bag or they stapled the bag, I'm not sure that was as much of a security, uh, uh, a security oriented practice as much as it was the safety of the content, so it wasn't tampered with, to protect their own image, their integrity, their reputation. Um, there might be safety practices that are in place in these various companies already that convey well to also answering the security needs. We just need to kind of take a step back, take a breath, and look at them through a security lens and see what we can already use, what's already kind of giving us that intelligence that we need in order to satisfy the security requirement. I don't know as anyone's done that yet.
So when you talk about these seals, I can't help but think all of the security measures that have to go along with that. So these seals, in the security world, right, like they need to be accounted for. They need to have serial numbers on them. They need to be under lock and key. Nobody else can have access to them. And what if a seal gets broken? What if it was accidentally broken? What happens? So there's like so much that goes along with these safety practices that can turn into security practices, as just like catering on an aircraft, that though there's just so much, that it just one thing leads to another, leads to another, leads to another. But you're right. I agree that there are, I'm sure, some safety practices currently that can be translated into security practices with just a little extra meat behind it.
Cool.
Yeah, that was a great example. Having to inventory whatever that protection mechanism is, I absolutely think that's key. And nothing is going to be foolproof, which is why we all know, from our years of doing this, that successful security is layered. So, what are the layers that make the most sense without creating an undue burden on this new community? Because they're not going to be as um, as able, I guess, to be able to bring all of those layers in the way that we traditionally do that for aviation. This is going to be very different. So what do the layers need to look like? And what does make the most sense, both economically and actually security for the NAS? Because bottom line is they are flying in the same airspace, and we have to have that same level of expectation. We as operators flying right next to them have to have that same level of predictability in an assurance that this guy over here, he's flying a safe operation so that it's not going to affect me.
Brilliant.
So
oh, go ahead. I was just gonna at some point when you're done, are you posing this question, or wait, no, I didn't know if you were kind of landing the thought or posing the question to these guys to pick up off of. I just want to at some point before we end in the next 15 minutes pull up a few comments. Is all I was gonna reach into. But that may shift the topic slightly. So go ahead.
I was going to ask is, given both of their experiences, and they have experiences from the people vetting part and from the 135 ops part, have to have both of those together. When we think about the kinds of layers that would be practical for this new drone environment, knowing each of you will go down like 16,000 rabbit holes all the way down because you have that level of knowledge, could you offer maybe just some higher level thoughts on pragmatic layers, security layers that would be more palatable for this industry?
Do you want to go?
Misty, do you want to start on security, and you pass it over to me, and I'll do personnel?
Yeah, sure. Like I mentioned before, I think that it's really not as extreme as people might think. Protect your drones, protect your facilities, protect your cyber, protect your data. These are all layers. And then again, the security program is going to come out and it's going to provide some additional clarity as into those layers. But and then added the STAs, that's again another layer. There's your onion. I feel like it's we have the layers for 108. It's not the same layers as like a 121 operator, your FedEx, your UPS. But I think that these layers I think that they're doable. I mean, I'm not I don't fly drones, so I mean, I could just be putting my foot in my mouth and saying that they're doable. But from a security standpoint, I think that these layers are a good starting point. I'm sure they will change, as time goes on. But like Ray mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, we're being proactive. Not we. I'm sorry. I'm no longer a part of the TSA. These agencies are being proactive, which is a breath of fresh air. I'll turn it over to you, Ray.
Absolutely, yeah, and adding to that layer of security is that personnel piece. Like right now, we know that many organizations, especially getting into this space, don't have the technology or capability or the know-how of who or what organizations currently exchange the information, collect it, process it, and have a relationship with these Fed entities. We know that that's going to be so fresh for this environment, right? But what I have seen in my experience is that many, if not all, aviation organizations existing today have a robust system that they leverage to maintain all of their security threat information, right? So there are processes through organizations out there that'll assist you in collecting the biographics, biometrics required for this required vetting in this process, and they'll complete the transaction for you. And as you work with them, it be implemented directly into Misty's workflow of that security program. Misty's kind of stating this is how we do it. And then the evidence-based information is where you then utilize a service that ends up submitting it. And that service will also come with things like reporting, so that when we get back to it, which is the heart of all these security programs, is the auditing portion. Did you do what you said that you were going to do to avoid those issues? And you as an operator can stand up and say, with our security program, and we know that from these two components, because that's all we're really speaking about today, that we can be sure that we met the minimum criteria set to be compliant in this field. It could be something elevated, right? So how do you not only start with a foundation of where you are security program, but then as you are developing that, start thinking about how you can start implementing those practices, like collecting the information from these covered individuals that you'll need, and how would you be able to process it, right? So start identifying organizations that could assist in that manner, or the services that are possible.
Good. I like it. All right. Well, a couple questions and comments throughout. Thanks for the interaction, everybody out there as well. It's been flowing in as you guys are talking, and the conversation keeps moving. So it's been hard to interject, but thanks everybody for your comments throughout. First of all, Andrew Corsaro said, Misty said, "Welcome to the private sector, Misty. The grass is a lot greener." So I thought that was fun.
Thank you. I could tell already.
Totally. And Andrew Bowen throughout, said common sense across a lot of the things we were saying. But I wanted to bring up a couple more specifics here. A fellow named Amar Murthy said, talked about, do you know him, Michelle? Okay.
I do. A long time, good old friend. Thank you,
nice.
Amar.
And he said a couple things in here. He said a previous comment that he's alluding to here about a catering anecdote. He said, we use seals with random numbers, non-sequential, and the responsible person conveyed the seal numbers to the receiving responsible person. So they had that sort of handshake code on either end, so that they knew that in transit nothing was open and contraband introduced or resealing before entering the airport. So that's a great example of what you guys were talking about that may end up being a kind of a similar measure used by the DoorDashers of the world in the future whenever something goes onto a drone, right? And then maybe they could scan that or whatever the handshake is to determine if it was accurate. And then his previous comment that I think you guys may be able to speak to as well is he said we had a situation where a catering company was an off-airfield background check of all employees revealed about 20% were deemed ineligible to have a CETA badge. How do you say that?
SIDA.
SIDA badge. And naturally, we instructed the company to relieve those folks of duty loading the prepared food onto the catering trucks that entered the airport and loading the catering onto the aircraft. So, again, kind of like another element. Any quick comments on that? I have like one or two other ones I want to pop up, but
I mean, if you're at an airport at any given time, you see an employee, you're looking out the glass, looking at your airplane that you're about to board, any logistics happening out there, but inside of that perimeter fence, every single person in that environment has a security threat assessment. Every last one of them. So just think about that. Then those regulations are related to different sets of regulations based on their area of operations, whether you're an airport employee, whether you're an aircraft operator employee. So there's a lot of pieces around how to get approval, but it all starts with the security threat assessment.
what about the people working at McDonald's behind the desk? I mean, is that so?
Yes,
is
sir.
it so they're all?
They
But
are
is it all the
included.
same level?
Yep. No,
or you're
it's
saying
not the
different levels?
same. I'll pass over to Missy so she can kind of tell you a little bit about what that looks like.
I didn't hear anything that you guys said. I'm sorry.
Oh, no worries. Yeah, well, go ahead, Ray.
Well, then I'll just jump in. When we're talking about like the concessions, all the individuals at an airport or concession also go through those same security threat assessments, right? In order for you to cross through the first section of gates where like the TSA security people are, that is called the sterile environment. You must have a security threat assessment. Every single passenger, anyone in that environment has a security threat assessment. When you're now looking past the gate and out on the airfield, that's the SIDA, and those folks too have a security threat assessment. Disqualifying instances for each environment could differ uniquely, but ultimately not greatly.
So I think though what Amar is bringing up is that the example that he brought up is a good example of where an off-airfield catering company was not doing its due diligence, and it was introducing risk, and because who knows, complacency, whatever, they made it to the aircraft and had to be pulled off of that once that security check had completed, recognizing they weren't SITA qualified. So this is what I mean by nothing is ever going to be fail-safe. We're going to have multiple layers. So that's how multiple layers play out in the legacy aviation world, and it worked, and those guys were pulled off. Way to go. What does that look like in the drone environment? That's something that it's going to be very different because it's a different kind of operation, different kinds of roles are going to be touching this stuff. What's that need to look like? I don't have the answer to that.
I think that in the drone world, this is where the audits are going to play an important role. You know, when the inspectors come in, they're going to look at your, you know, like say CHRC paperwork or, you know, whatever your vetting paperwork entails to ensure that you're not allowing people that have, you know, a disqualifying factor, you know, touch the cargo. So I think that, you know, again, that's yet another layer, these audits, to, you know, be sure that you are doing what you're supposed to be doing and you are, you know, making sure that people that have disqualifying factors aren't having their hands in the operation.
Awesome. Another person asked if you anticipate, I don't know how to say this, an AOSSP will be required of the drone operators.
Not that full of a program. No, it states in 108 that it's going to be a limited program. So 101 G is what it actually specifically refers to. So it's not going to be the same security program as you know, American or Southwest. It's not going to be, you know, that detailed. It's going to be limited.
Okay. Good. I'm kind of rapid firing these, but these are great. So Joel Jones asked or mentioned this is going to be a big shift for Section 44807 operators, 99% of which are aerial applicators. Any comments on that? Nothing? No. Okay, cool. I don't know what that means.
Me either. That's why I'm not commenting.
Okay, cool. So all right. Well, in conclusion, in the next few minutes, what's our consensus here, if we have consensus on whether or not the security element should remain tied together with the enablement side, or should they be broken apart and maybe considered separate, which is what the article that I mentioned earlier recommended, was maybe separating those two so that you don't have the issue of maybe like over Nate certifying a group, down to the person like putting the chips in the bag and then sealing the bag and then putting the bag on the shelf and then taking the bag of sealed chips and putting it in a container that then goes to, it's like, how far down the line does it go? What is there, or should it, as kind of Michelle teed up earlier, like this just be a placeholder, what's written in Part 108 today, plus the comments, the revision now hopefully being a more manageable like combination of the two? Or should they actually be like broken apart, like the article was saying, and considered separate, the security side and the scale side of things? What do you guys think?
Well, for me, I feel like it should stay like one full story, stay together. I truly vision how these topics apply to the overall Part 108 story. I oftentimes look at it like the entryway door, right? As you get into this, there are going to be initial steps that you are going to have to overcome in order to get approval to conduct these operations. And it seems like from the Part 108 NPRM that this is going to be some area of consideration. In my experience, especially being under vetting programs, looking at security operations, as you establish those up front, the operations that subside afterwards become inevitably focused on the operation, not so much on what is required to operate. So if we can overcome the initial requirements, we can then focus on the bulk. Don't let the initial requirements of vetting be the thing that holds you up from flying your amazing operation. Simply put, there can be solutions out there that can be implemented, and you can overcome many hurdles related to these security programs and vetting.
And folks like yourselves, former TSA, could probably help interpret what they might have meant, as we've been discussing this whole time, which is always helpful, to then be like, well, if you do it this way and say these three things in there, that's probably likely to get approved. Whereas if you do it this other way, it's more complicated, and actually you're not even lining up with the three major concerns that we know the TSA typically has, right? You could help like make those adjustments, streamline, help people not waste a lot of time, and help get green lights, for the simplest path forward, right? Which would be the goal.
You hit the mark right there, is saving a lot of time. When you're not used to this environment, there's a lot of back and forth with the government trying to get it right. And that's one of the things with 135 compliance solutions is we know how to hit the mark, the first time. So, really saving companies a lot of money, a lot of time, because time is money, getting these security programs approved.
And between now and whenever Part 108 actually is established, it could be quite a while, right? I mean, it could be 6 months, it could be 2 years, who knows, right? So in the next year or two, what should people do, in your opinion, in the meantime, before we know for a fact what it's going to say?
I always lean on the side of being proactive. It's never too early to prepare yourself for what could come, right? So as we see the NPRM be put out there, that could be at the highest level. Through the comments and adjudication, they could decrease a little bit, but I'm sure we can all agree that TSA is not just going to like disappear from the Part 108 equation altogether. So I always like to push, be proactive rather than reactive. Start thinking about some of the logistical challenges you have. But from the personnel side, because I'll let Missy hit that, is how do you look at all your folks, start collecting things like biographics on them, understand what could be required for submission of information, and start identifying options like, could there be, I don't know, in the future, some way to have comparable vetting? Like, hey, does this person have some other type of credential that we could use? I don't know. Let's start questioning that, so that we can identify if we are going to have to vet our folks. Do we, one, have the information available the day they said they need it? Two, is it the accurate information? And three, do we have the system in place to be able to send it to them? Because that in itself digitally, so not over paper, like, because now we're not in a paper environment. That's also something we're going to have to really be focused on. Pass it over to Misty.
I agree. And I think, being proactive is hugely important for saving you time and money. Also, just to get in that security frame of mind that a lot of people just aren't normally, I think. It'll help you understand the regulation better. And also you might identify some procedures that you already have that maybe you thought were along the lines of safety or just like company protocol that are actually security regulations. And if you don't already have those regulations, this definitely buys you time to start figuring those out and, budget for them and everything else. So definitely being proactive is key.
That's a good point. You could start budgeting now for 18 months out for when you might need this a new software platform, as you mentioned, Ray, or whatnot. Also, you might actually run into a security gap that is a big deal that goes beyond just trying to check the box for compliance, right? You might actually run into a scenario where you're like, we need to fix that now. Right. Who cares what the thing, the hard requirement's going to be? That's a big risk, whatever that might be, some gaps. But anyway, well, thank you guys so much for being a guest on the show. Guests and brilliant thoughts, ideas. We haven't really touched too much, Michelle, in the past on like TSA specific, more so FAA and others, other aspects. So
I think we're going to need to do more of this, David.
For sure. Hey, well, great.
David, Misty and I, we're always solution-driven individuals. We'd love to work with anyone and everyone that is interested in learning more about this. My big thing, my anecdote here is that as a solution-driven person, I am currently in development of a solution for personnel vetting and stuff like that. So as you want to invite us to come back to the podcast, I'd be more than happy to share some of the excitement on some of the solutions we're developing so that we can not only overcome that initial hurdle of the development of security program, but also help get your folks vetted as well and get you operationally ready to go.
Sweet. Come on. All right, guys. Well, thanks everybody as well for listening in, typing all the comments. I love the interaction, and we'll see you again live next week on This Week in Drones. Talk soon.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks.